All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to our interview here in Gateway. Ed and Ryan here, along with Chelsea and Laura, and we're here in Gateway because we wanted to help explain some of the stuff that's going on here with the bond validation issue, the public hearing that was delayed, the possible assessment, and anything else that's going on here in Gateway. But first, Chelsea, why don't you explain to everybody what a district manager does for a CDD?
Okay, so my name is Chelsea O'Reilly. I local here. I am the district manager as of 90 days ago officially. Today's day 90. Similar to a municipality, I'm like the town manager, city, county manager. CDDs are a unique governmental entity. I'm learning, dictated by a couple Florida statutes. Operational, imagine a Parks and Rec department, a utilities department, and a public works department all combining as one. So all of the permitting is with the county still. A lot of like the municipal services like garbage and waste collection is with the county. But overall, I would oversee the operations of the district and all of its subordinates. So. And
for anyone that doesn't know, you were at the Public Works Department on Fort Myers Beach, and 90 days ago moved from Fort Myers Beach to Gateway.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. And Laura is the assistant.
I'm the assistant district manager. Yep. I've been here a little over 2 years. I actually served as the interim district manager in the time frame when our previous district manager left last September and Chelsea started in May.
Great. And it appears to be some drama going on here in Gateway or confusion. But first, let's start with the millage rate. What's going on with the millage rate? And it seems like there's a possibility it could go up.
Okay. So millage is in relation to property appraiser and the tax value of a home. The district doesn't have a millage rate. The district uses millage is under ad valorem assessments. The district operates under non-ad valorem assessments. The millage rate is based on your property value, whereas a non-ad valorem assessment is based on the benefit to that property. And so there's a whole mathematical equation, assessment methodology that the district adopted or updated a couple years ago.
Fiscal 21 was the first year. This will be our third budget season using that new assessment methodology.
So that is a whole, like, if you geek out with numbers, that's definitely something you want to look into. But depending on the area of where you live within the district will depend on your increase or your rate that you would pay. I think generally we're at like 10% proposed for next fiscal year.
What does that mean? What do you mean 10%?
10% increase over last year.
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain why there's going to be an increase?
Yes. So there are different line items that the district and its subcommittees provide input to, mainly Stony Brook Advisory Committee and the Pelican Preserve Advisory Committee. Many of the increases or changes reflected are just like in your normal home. You have increased rates for FPL, fuel, and so our changes really reflect that for this upcoming fiscal year.
Things that we need to do on our day-to-day operations, we're feeling the increase in prices the same as everybody else.
So it's 10, I don't know, is 10% normal or is it
it's
going rate now? Or?
I looked at an average over the back to 2011, and I'm sure everybody will remember last year when the budget was originally proposed, we were proposing 100% increase, and we got it down to a little over 10. 10% seems to be pretty standard.
Wait, you were proposing 100%?
It was over 100% increase last year, and the board got it down to 10 for our current
what would
year.
Cause 100% increase?
We'll get into that.
Okay, all right, I see.
But I just want to remind everyone about that because they're all freaking out about the 10%, and we actually started out over 100% last year, and we got it down to right around 10. 10% based on inflation rates and the cost of materials and everything that we're dealing with, the same as everyone in the community is fair. It historically the budget has never been adopted at the rate that it's been approved at. So the approved rate is 10%. The board usually finagles some things and gets it down. Their goal is to try to get it into single digits.
Okay. Now, how tell people how big Gateway is, number of homes, and how big is the budget?
Our budget is, 20 million this year, I think.
Laura's the number guru.
Sure.
She's a
Yeah,
So 20
yeah. We're about 4,500 acres. We have about 6,500 customers right now on our utility. Our it's been hovering between 17 to 20 million depending on the year. So it's for some people it's a big budget.
For
And that's
CDD,
all.
that's a large budget.
That is a very
but
large
that's all
budget.
from the collection of the taxes, or there are other
The non-ad valorem.
fees?
Nope, that's everything comes from
Okay.
the gateway assessment that you see on your tax bill. That's where
Gotcha.
those dollars come from.
Now, let's talk about the building first.
Sure.
So there's a building back here that is going to be replaced. So you're hoping to get replaced with more money in the budget. They're looking at some facility or land over behind or across from 7-Eleven, I believe, by Rock Sushi.
Yep, it's between Skinny Dogs and Rock
Okay,
Sushi.
and so that's a piece of property there. Last meeting, there was an issue maybe with the landowner and that somebody was going to look over at the commons area. Can you kind of give us get us up to date on where we are in the new building?
Yep. So we actually have a modular trailer out back. If you wanna, we can show you the reason.
You see, I thought this was a shell that Chelsea brought from the
this
beach.
is an example of what we're dealing
This
with in
is
the trailer right now.
a mushroom that I pulled out of the trailer about an hour ago.
They are growing up through the floor.
Why are you growing mushrooms in the trailer, Laura?
We have no idea.
Sell it and help.
We've had it remediated once for mold and had the mushrooms removed. That was back in March, and they came back in June.
Yeah.
So
in 2020, the district manager at the time suggested, clearly we had an issue with area and space for staff. All of the staff used to be in this building, used to be elbow to elbow. They purchased the modular trailer, had it installed. 2 years later, I don't know if it was installation defects or what, but clearly we have an issue with these mushrooms. And so we actually entered into a short-term lease over at Fairway Lakes Drive for a suite, which the admin that are currently in this building will move over to that suite, actually probably next week.
Okay.
And then the utility staff and the field staff will move from that modular trailer into this building. And then we're going to auction off that trailer with Royal Auction Group to hopefully offset some of the costs incurred.
of having to rent.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Hopefully offset the cost of having to rent
Okay.
the unit.
So the trailer will be still worth something with all the mold and the mushrooms?
Somebody
Well,
will
it's-
probably want it for
Oh, I see.
something, but
As
yes,
is.
it's an as is. We're disclosing
Gotcha.
what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
So
So you're going to have that building for your admin, and then you're looking at other property, or where are we on the property purchase?
So there's two properties that will actually be up for board discussion on Thursday. The one being the Commons is the recreational area that the pool's at. We have a zoning verification letter out with Lee County to confirm that we can put an administrative building there. So that should be pending within the next day or so. We should. be getting
Okay,
that
the
back.
Commons building where the pool is.
Yes.
You think that it will be okay to have a building there? Because I know last meeting, there was some confusion that maybe the county wouldn't go.
right, we were
Convert
waiting
a
for
park.
clarification and verification
So it
that
sounds
we
like
can
it'd
build
be
it there. At this point, we don't have like total verification.
feeling good about it.
Yes.
Yes. We're
yes.
So that takes the other property off the
Yes.
map, that you
Correct.
don't have to buy it. So
Correct.
that's saved money right
Yes.
there, because
Yes.
we already own that property over there.
Correct.
Is it going to be on where the pool is area inside the fence, or are you just going to build it right out in the lot there?
It would be out in the lot.
And,
Gotcha.
yeah, out in the
And
lot.
keeping in mind too that property is utilized by Lee County Solid Waste. In the event we have an impending storm and debris and damage done within the community, that is their staging area for
Oh.
all of the construction debris and horticultural debris from a post-disaster standpoint.
So the building will be off the table that the property that we had to purchase over there.
Correct.
And well, that's good news. That's a savings there. So
Yeah, it's over $800,000. So
Yeah.
yes.
and so tell us about what we're going to build over there on the Commons lot if that goes through.
So typically when you do a building, you start with your uses. So clearly we need office space, we need room for our board to meet, maybe even a community space that they could rent out, have birthday parties, etc. So once you determine the uses is when you start to build out the actual construction of the building, how many office spaces you need, the occupancy, do you need a kitchen, how many bathrooms do you need? That scope and specs will go back to the board at the next meeting for them to approve and hopefully begin design of this new admin building.
Okay. So by the way, if anybody has any questions, if you're watching live, you can type them in the chat box and we'll pass them along. So this Thursday is a first public hearing for the budget,
Yes.
Correct.
right? So
It's the same, it's the public hearing that we have annually in August because the budget needs to be approved or adopted by the end of August.
right. So unlike some of the other municipalities have them at 5:01, and there are two of them.
Ours is at 6,
6 o'clock at night.
6 p.m. on Thursday.
Just one?
Just the one meeting for the budget.
Okay,
yes.
so if anyone has any questions about whether or not they're going to pay more in their tax bill, they should come Thursday
Absolutely.
and bring it up,
Right.
or look over the budget at least before Thursday.
Right.
Correct.
What are the big increases going to be? The biggest increases, like the top three in the budget, if it was to be approved with the 10% increase?
Was operating expenses. While we haven't increased our staff size, we've moved staff around across different departments to be able to still perform the same functions with the same amount of people. We just moved them around as we need them. Staff actually was one of the costs that went up a little bit this year. I'm sure everyone understands how hard it is to find people to hire. We have a very, very good staff right now, and we're doing everything we can to keep them. So we did have, we normally get a 4% increase in wages, which is the same thing that we asked for this next year. So that we didn't ask for anything extra there. I'm trying to think, what was it? The operating staff. I'm forgetting something.
I think they did choose to put additional money in the reserves.
Oh, reserves, yes.
Okay.
They had not been funding the reserves. We had been putting in 300,000 this year. They decided to do 5.
What is the reserve account?
Think of it like your rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Something goes wrong. Therefore, it's money that we set aside to do projects that we aren't necessarily planning to do, or if we have things way down the road, we'll have the money in there to do them. But for something this size, even to only set aside 500,000 is better than nothing.
Mhm.
But we really can't do much with 500,000 if we were to have some kind of catastrophic repair that needed to be done.
The reserves that she's referring to is for the general fund.
Yes.
So the utility fund.
Anything with utilities is handled completely separate. That's funded through your water bill.
Mhm.
This is everything but that.
So before we get to the bond, the totally confusing bond issue, let's talk about this gigantic park drawing or plan or proposal or not proposal that has been brought up ever since I lived here. I remember it being part of the master plan, that there needed to be some kind of, or they always wanted there to be some kind of park next to the pool. But it got voted down. It seems like it's a lot of money, and now it's is it back on the drawing board because it's part of the master plan, or is it really going to be built over there? I mean, that looked like a gigantic park.
So thanks for diving right in.
Yeah.
I waited 10 minutes. Almost
I told her the big
12.
topics. Park.
Yeah.
So when staff was directed over a year ago to look at this bond validation, it was, what do we project over the next 10 plus years? And so you put everything on the table and you want to go through one validation. So if we put $0 on the table for the park, nothing would ever get constructed. If we put $10, then maybe in 10 years, if the committee and the board wanted to put something there, whatever that may be, they would have a funding source to do so.
Mhm.
But if they put no money there in the bond validation, there is no money for any projects to do for the next 10 years, unless they went through another validation process or did a short-term loan.
And even though the $10 million is in there for the park, that doesn't mean that they'll spend $10 million in the park. They may not ever do the park. Like Chelsea said, it just gives them the flexibility. If 10 years down the road, they decide that they want to do even part of the stuff in there, that way the funds would be available. Because I remember from the survey last year that there was a lot of interest to do small things like a walking trail and some exercise equipment on the walking trail and maybe a playground. If we didn't include any dollars in there, they wouldn't be able to spend any money even on those small things for the park.
So if you borrow, let's say you have $10 million set aside for a park, but you don't use it because, you're not going to build a park, you're still paying back on it. Right?
Well, we wouldn't borrow the money
I
unless
see.
we were going to do the project.
You're getting okay to borrow the money,
Yeah,
even though you
think of
might
it
not
like
use it.
your bucket list. Like these are all of the things that we think that we need to do in the next year or next 10 plus years, or may want to do in the next 10 plus years. How much do we think that all of that work is going to cost. And that's where we came up with the number. That doesn't mean that we're going to borrow that much.
I know, but
it comes in little pieces.
But do
so.
you get
I
you
understand.
get the point that when government borrows money, they very rarely
I can
give
tell
it back.
you that earlier when Gateway was first founded, we took out, we had a bond validation. I may be wrong on the number, but I believe it was for over $100 million. We barely borrowed issued $10 million worth of bonds. So historically, when any government entity does a bond validation, I don't think anyone has ever taken out the full amount that they validate, ever. Not even just Gateway, like any government entity.
Okay.
So it's just like
I hear you.
Big umbrella.
So, but there seems to be, from watching the last meeting, there seems to be a lot of confusion amongst the residents that they're going to owe $1,100
right
a month or a year or whatever it is. So how do you straighten that out so that they feel comfortable that it's okay for you guys to do this, even though you might not spend it?
So there's a process that every municipal entity has to follow if you want to do a bond validation. All that does is like your budget, sets the cap. Okay. Now, if and when that bond validation goes through at whatever amount it may be, what would happen next is they would be issued in series. And so typically a bond, you have your cap, and typically you would take out like a 3-year series bond, because in a project, you have year 1 is typically design, year 2 is permitting, and year 3 is construction. So realistically, you would have to go back to the board, have a public hearing, and say, okay, these, as staff and as the community, these are the projects that we want to see done in the next 3 years. True numbers would have to be put to that, and that's when the actual cost and money would be borrowed against the total validated amount. So no money is being spent. It's being approved as, here's your cap, kind of like a credit card.
Right.
You get approved for this amount.
Limit.
You ask him, hey, can I go buy some gym equipment? She says yes, and then you go swipe and you buy it.
So why this year though? Do you get the impression that from sometimes a meeting isn't the whole sense of a community, but from the last meeting, it seemed like people were saying, why this year?
Sure. No, I can address that. This was actually discussed last year during our budgeting process. As part of that whole, when we had the 100% increase, when the board looked at things, we took out, we applied for a line of credit with the bank for $7.5 million to help us bridge the gap between the time. So for this fiscal year, so we would have money to do projects that we needed to do this fiscal year, stuff we had to get done. And then the bonds were discussed last year during the meeting. There just was not enough time for the board to have the bonds issued a year ago to cover the project. So this has been something that's been in the works for over a year. It was discussed last year during budgeting process. It was discussed during the whole budgeting process this year. So it's not something that the board just thought of.
Right.
So we were working our way towards that already last year, because they understand that these projects that need to be done, I mean, the infrastructure is either at or past its useful life.
Give examples of some of the infrastructure.
Oh, sure, like our irrigation pipes. For people call and email us all the time about the pipes watering their cars on the road instead of the landscaping.
This happens. It's true.
We have, I think at last count, there were over 50 battery operated, like 9-volt battery operated controllers out in the field. So it's very hard for us to control our irrigation with battery operated timers. Those pipes need to be replaced. The controllers need to be replaced. We'll be able to be much more efficient and keep water where it needs to go with these things. So that's just one small part of it.
I also notice it while it's raining, the sprinklers are on.
Yeah, we have no way to control that because everything is battery. So part of the new controllers has rain sensors and all of those things in it. So we'll be able to save water. We'll be able to be more efficient. We'll be able to control the schedules better. They can turn them on and off remotely if we need to. So
in addition to the pipes, what else?
Stormwater system. There's just things that need to be cleaned and videoed and repaired. I mean,
Swales
things
need to be reclaimed.
Swale, yeah, because we noticed the road flooding. I call them ditches. They're called swales. They need to be redug to allow the water to go into there to keep it off the road. That's all things that we just need.
What about the ponds and the lakes? How are we doing on that? I remember hearing about that years and years ago. Are we all fixed up on the ponds and the lakes? Or?
So there is phase. What do you guys call it?
We're in phase 2 right now.
Phase 2
of lake bake restoration.
Phase 2 is supposed to start outside of rainy season.
It was supposed to start last year. We had some problems with permitting, and we're not able to get started on it yet. So it's got pushed off till November probably.
So that got delayed, and in the interim, the district, the board said, we want to stop piecemealing this. We want to look at this as a bigger picture. And so actually in the last 2 months, they've worked, staff and the engineer has worked together and presented to the board what we call a pond prioritization list. The board approved that pond prioritization list based on critical, moderate ponds.
Things that were resident facing and not resident facing.
How many ponds and lakes do we have here?
A lot.
Yeah. Why don't they just fill some of them in and stop with all this?
We can't. That's that is all managed by South Florida Water
I know, I
Management.
was joking, but it seems like there's way too much
yeah.
to maintain at this point, and we have to do it. We can't get
Yes.
help from. It's not like we can call up Lee County and say, "Help us out here."
No,
there
they're
are
our
lakes.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Julie wants to I think she wants you to clarify. Did you just say borrow?
We did not borrow $7.5 million. It's the
Okay.
same as the loans. We were approved for a line of credit at
Gotcha.
$7.5 million. I've been submitting for monthly reimbursements starting in May. I'm going to be asking for another one at the meeting on Thursday, and the total that's been requested to be reimbursed from that loan at this point is under $1 million.
Okay.
And we only have one more month to go in the fiscal year, so we didn't
Right.
even come close to the 7.5.
Okay.
So we were just approved to spend up to 7.5.
There you go,
million.
Julie Harris.
So the ponds it's a whole nother animal, because the funding for the construction and design of those ponds normally comes from the state revolving loan fund. The state only has a pot of money that all counties and municipalities and governmental entities can apply for every year. Now, we could put together this plan of all of these ponds that we want to be redone or rehabbed, go to the state SRF and say, hey, we need $10 million. They could turn to us and say, well, we only have $5 million. So as an alternative funding source, that's why the ponds were put into the bonds. Because if SRF, which typically our last loans were at zero.
But we will not be at zero anymore. We got the last 0%
Yeah.
loan.
So if the bond issue goes through, we got the park project on there, which is a question mark at this point,
Right.
but it's on there in case it gets built. Maybe public
Part of
opinion
it, none
changes
of
it.
it.
I mean, how
10
long?
years, who knows?
Okay,
Yeah.
but the money's still there from borrowing it this year. If they change their
But
opinion,
we're not borrowing it.
right.
That's everyone
But you
gets
could
confused.
borrow it.
Yes.
So it would be available for how long?
Each bond series, when it's issued, is for projects that you expect to complete within 3 years.
Got it.
The payments are amortized over 20 years. So that was a way that the board also was able to accomplish these projects without having to have the higher dollar amount.
The validation is based on the master engineer's report, which is a 10-year report. So theoretically, 10 years.
Okay, so let's
Right.
say you approve this bond validation on Thursday. I know it's not the
We
right
aren't even
thing.
talking about
Right,
it
right,
on
right,
Thursday.
right. But let's just for argument's
I just want to
sake,
make sure we don't get confused.
Right, right.
So
When-
yes,
October
October
6th.
6th. Yes.
You have 10 years to borrow that money? Or how long?
Yes.
Okay, 10 years.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, so you got the ponds and the lakes and the possible park up there. What else?
We're doing streetlights, the admin building.
What do you mean streetlights, being that Gateway Boulevard is owned by the county?
Gateway Boulevard is owned by the county. We own the streetlights.
Yeah.
Because of the oak trees. Part of the deal when the road was conveyed to Lee County is that we are responsible for all repairs on the sidewalks, the streets, the valley gutters, anything that was done by the oak trees. Gateway has to pay for it. The county will not.
And most of the streetlights that are out there are original.
Yes, and they are
Yeah.
direct bury wires, and we're shorting all the time.
Yeah.
And we get
Are
calls.
they turtle
daily.
friendly? Never mind.
That doesn't matter
Wrong
here.
municipality.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about that here. We don't have to worry about that.
Oh, okay. So is that everything? Like, or are there other things?
That's
too?
the big stuff.
That's true.
Those are the big ticket items.
So back to the park again, just for a second.
Beating a dead
It's,
horse, huh?
I know, because I know that
No, it's
when
fine.
the comments that you see are mostly about the park, and they're not all negative. Some people are like, when is that going to be built? Because,
Sure.
they probably have more money than other people, but who knows? So there was a couple of surveys done, it appears, that about the park. Where do we stand on the community desire to have a big park like that? Do you guys know?
So going back a year, there was a survey that was put out. Don't know the details behind it, but there was a survey pushed out kind of last minute, and community input was they were unfavorable for any park.
Okay.
For the park as a whole.
For the park as a whole,
Yes.
maybe not necessarily
Some of the
certain
smaller
aspects.
things that I mentioned, like the trail and maybe a playground.
Truthfully, and one of the things that I think would be super helpful moving forward is either re-implementing the park advisory committee and kind of like board cab at the beach,
Yeah.
and having that committee comprised of residents, businesses, vet a project, this project, a small project, a big project, whatever that may be. And go out there and be the voice and gauge. Is this even something the community wants? Do we want to? We don't want to compete with the private sector. We don't want to compete with, tennis courts that your community may have.
Yeah.
We don't want to duplicate what the amenities they already have available in their own communities.
Right.
We want to offer something
should be
and better.
It should be an added benefit.
Yes.
And
Right.
so what that added benefit is, it needs vetted by the community.
So is there a possibility that $10 million could come out of the bond question, or are you just going to leave it in there because there's no reason to take it out? If you don't borrow it, you don't borrow it.
The board ultimately has the final decision.
Okay.
The master engineer's report was adopted as it sat as the amended and restated master engineer's report, which did have the $10 million in it. They have the public hearing on October 6th. They could choose to further amend the report. They could choose to leave it as is and say, we're not even going to talk about this for 7 years or 10 years or ever. They may say we want to talk about it tomorrow. So ultimately, that's a board decision.
And Scott, we did answer that question. So if you have a chance to go back to re-listen, your question will be answered there. One question about this park here, being that I have some history here, the lights were always a nightmare here. Have they repaired the lights, or is that part of the?
Yep. The lights in the park over here were replaced. They're LED lights now, and we had the boxes that were on the bottom. They replaced some of them last year, and the remaining ones will all be replaced within the next 2 months. They should be by end of October. Everything should be replaced. But they're LED, and our electricity bill went down. It's like a third of what it used to be with the new lights in there.
To maintain this park, to me, it's kind of like on the beach with.
It's expensive.
Bay Oaks. It's an amenity for the community.
Correct.
But do we know what the percentage of kids use the soccer and the flag compared to outside of Gateway? Is that something they keep track of?
So with the leagues, they have to provide rosters and let us know if they're either a Gateway resident or non-Gateway resident.
Yeah.
But that's based off the honor system.
Yeah. Easy to fudge.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I do want to make a point. A lot of people that come from government background, funding sources. There's all kinds of different funding sources talking about parks. You've been around here long enough. I'm sure you know that soccer complex was constructed with park impact fees from the county.
That's right.
The county right now in their budget has $380,000 in a line item dedicated to Gateway for park impact fees. So if the board decided that they wanted to put a trail up the FPL easement, maybe extend it or do an added benefit, the district could potentially dip into those park impact fees as long as it's a new amenity.
Okay, so you couldn't ask for county money to help improve what's already here.
Correct.
Okay.
It needs to be new.
It couldn't be a replacement.
See.
It has to be new.
Where are those impact fees? Is that a fund that's growing somehow?
Yes.
From what?
From new development. So there's,
Okay.
anytime there's a new development, you have road impact fee money, you have community impact fee money, you have regional park impact fee money. It's all in the county's budget. Fire impact fees. Utility enterprise funds, you usually have their own impact fees that, if you have to tap into the system.
Well, that seems like a no-brainer to add something to the community, especially the easement there. People use that to walk their dog and ride their bikes. It doesn't really connect all the way out, but I guess you guys would figure that out, right?
Sure.
So the point is that there is potential funding,
Yeah.
other funding sources out there for park improvements.
Yeah. So there was some kind of discussion between, I think it was Bill or it was Ed and Bill or somebody, maybe it was Bob, about Pelican Preserve.
Yes.
And how do they fit into Gateway, and that's why this whole public hearing was delayed until October, because they weren't paying or something. They weren't figured into the cost. So why does Pelican not think they're part of Gateway? What's going on with that? Or was there some kind of confusion there?
Sure. There was an agreement back in, I can't remember when it was dated, but there was an agreement between Pelican Preserve and the rest of Gateway that because they do not have direct access to anything here in Gateway, they need to drive all the way around, just like someone that doesn't live in Gateway. They don't pay into the general fund, so they don't pay for like the park, the soccer field, the pool, none of that. They have their own money that they pay to take care of the district assets inside of Pelican. So because Pelican doesn't pay into the fund where these bonds are coming out of, which is the general fund, they were not originally included in the bond. The more we looked at it and the board looked at it, there were some questions that they did receive benefit from some of these new improvements in the assets, even though they don't pay into the general fund. So we need to look at reassessing to make sure that they paid their fair share for the benefit that they received from the projects that we're going to do.
So it sounds like they'll pay less.
They will pay less because they will not be using all of the assets, like the admin building. They'll pay for part of that.
Okay.
Because they have their meetings there. They come to meetings there. They visit us there. We handle all of their administrative tasks from there.
If they're not really part of Gateway, why do they have elected board members?
That's what the community elected.
There was an election.
They're publicly elected officials.
I know, but I guess I don't understand. If they're not really part of Gateway, why can they even run?
They're part of Pelican Preserve is on our utility system, so they are part of Gateway. They all live within the Gateway boundaries, the physical boundaries of Gateway. They live within there, so they can run for the Board of Supervisors.
So it sounds like a cluster.
Yeah.
But so my guess is the reason that road has never been developed on the way to Stony Brook is for this very reason, right? Otherwise,
Pelican?
they'd be connected.
Sure.
If that back road was connected to Pelican Preserve, they'd be totally connected.
That back road is we're close. We've gotten permits. We're close to starting and awarding a construction, but that will be only for emergency access.
And utility vehicles. They will not be able to come and go from there on a daily basis, or only during an emergency.
Why?
They won't even have.
Why? It seems silly.
That's what the community wanted.
Which their community.
The community wanted.
Yeah.
And the
All right.
board directed.
So the other thing that I found interesting was one of the guys, whoever it was, said that they would just pay it up front. Like they had all this money sitting.
Yeah, they do a very good job of reserving
I
money
see.
for projects.
So they
yes.
would just, now the question that I had when I was watching, let's say this bond thing gets approved,
Mhm.
but you never spend any money. Now you've got all their money sitting in
We
your,
wouldn't take their money until they would be the same as
I
the community pays in. So they would not be responsible for paying anything until
Okay.
we actually spend something.
Okay. So that's why now everything's fixed up. You got the October 6th public hearing, and what's going to happen there? Why should people come or not come? Or, I mean, I hope they understand what's going on here now
Sure.
that unless you think there's more to clear up with, you're not really borrowing $80 million
Right.
tomorrow, and you don't really pay it back the day after tomorrow.
Right.
Correct.
It's just there if you need it.
And there's
Then you
more
can
steps.
get it.
We can't just go randomly take out the money. I mean,
Right.
there has to be, we have to come up with a list of projects. There needs to be another engineer's report to validate that the cost of the projects that we're predicting are accurate. There needs to be another public hearing. So it's not like the board can just go, yeah, let's go ahead and build that building and we just take some money out. It doesn't work like that.
And might it turn out to be a different dollar amount than 80? Could it turn out to be 50 or 100?
It could be,
or
it can't go more. It can
because
always
that's
be
what the
less.
engineer's report says
Yes,
you need it
the
for.
validation is for $80 million. We can never exceed that. It can always be less.
Okay.
Always be less. We
And
don't
that-
have to borrow it all.
That's how we're proceeding with the public hearing and,
Right.
and the letters. The board, again, they meet in between now and then. They could choose to amend it based on feedback, further amend it based on feedback from the community. But as of right now, this is how we're proceeding. with the
Okay.
amendment.
So October 6th is the first public hearing. They'll get feedback, have a second public hearing.
That is the public hearing.
That's the public hearing for the bond validation.
Okay.
The only additional public hearings would be if the validation is approved and we move forward with it. There would be more public hearings when the board would decide to issue the bonds and start accumulating some debt.
So just, I'm going to read a couple of questions that were sent to me. I don't like to read them, but 2023 general fund budget for Gateway areas 1 and 2, which you'll have to explain, shows a 13.7% increase in the assessment for single family homes to a proposed $846.77 for 2023. That's appears to be a $607,000 increase from the revised 22 budget. Is that correct?
Seems off.
We'd have to look at that
Okay.
individual
Yeah,
property owner.
Right.
Customer care at gatewaydistrict.org.
Yes. Any questions?
Okay.
Customer care at gatewaydistrict.org.
How much is each supervisor paid?
They
No,
get
it's
paid
not a lot.
$200 per meeting with a maximum of $4,800 for the year. That is a state statute. They
Okay.
cannot change that.
So they could have more meetings, but they're not going to.
Yeah, they get
Right.
they usually about this time of year they aren't getting paid for their meetings anymore because they meet all those the extra meetings that we have, the ones that are tabled, the public hearings. They don't get paid for those.
Got it. What else? In the past, when we have implemented committees, as soon as someone got held accountable or a community spoke up on their desires, the committees would get disbanded by the district. So if there's a park committee, how would that be handled when it came to the residents' wishes or input to how they'd like to see the dollars spent? Wasn't there already surveys sent out? You answered the survey one, but I mean,
So
a volunteer's a volunteer. If the board doesn't have to listen to what they say, we see it all the time.
it's an advisory committee, and they advise either the Board of Supervisors or a town council. Recommendations could be made, and it gets to the board, and they do a 180 or 360.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ultimately they are advisory in nature,
Right.
but it does provide a venue for public input and truly vetting of projects.
Are there any committees now?
We have two committees that report directly to the Board of Supervisors, and that's the Stony Brook Advisory Committee and the Pelican Preserve Advisory Committee. Now, in the works in the last probably 6 months, trying to formalize what we'll call subcommittees of those. So Pelican Preserve is a little bit more organized than Stony Brook. They're both kind of trying to get organized officially as subcommittees. They have the subcommittees of we call it PPAC. We love our acronyms in government.
It's a lot easier than saying Pelican Preserve Advisory Committee. So
They have a landscape work group, a security work group,
ponds work group.
and a ponds work group. So, but officially direct advisory committees to the Board of Supervisors, there's two.
Yeah, but nothing really general like a parks committee or something
Correct.
like
Not
that.
at this time, no.
Because Stony Brook is behind a gate and Pelican Preserve is behind a gate. It's almost like the rest of the communities don't have any representation other than the board here. And I have to say, the Parks Committee, whatever it was called back in the day, the board did listen. I mean, that was where the dog park came from, and that was where the tree lighting came from, and a couple other ideas. So sometimes they do listen.
Well, I think I can just say, like in the 2 years that I've been here, the board, they can be difficult sometimes, but I think that the board that we have now realizes that we need to have more of that community involvement, and the idea of forming a parks committee or possibly even like a landscape committee, because that seems to be coming up a lot more, especially with the oak trees. That's something that they are receptive to.
Well,
or maybe previous boards weren't. So.
And hiring a public information officer. I mean, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I mean, you name it. We live in a world of social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how you thrive.
Yeah,
and
that's for sure.
And hopefully we can communicate that better with our new public information officer.
You mentioned that we're in Gateway responsible for the sidewalks, and the trees have done some serious damage to the sidewalks.
Yes.
We love the trees because of the canopy effect from the trees, but the sidewalks seem to get beat up all the time. Where are we on? Are they all fixed? Or are they on the process of being on Gateway Boulevard?
It's a constant process.
Yeah.
So the district conveyed Gateway Boulevard and Griffin to Lee County a couple years ago, but under
2017,
under the premise of an interlocal agreement. Now, we love our interlocal agreements between municipalities. And so in that, it said that the district has to maintain any curbs, valley gutters, sidewalks that if they're damaged by landscaping, i.e. oak trees, or any other landscaping, that we are responsible for maintaining and repairing. So it is a constant battle, you know.
It's just revolving. We just work our way down, come back, work our way down again. So
I also notice a lot of traffic on Gateway Boulevard all the way past the roundabout because of the school.
Yes.
That can't be. I mean, that's a traffic problem there. There were 7 deputies, Lee County Sheriff's deputies out there today with lights.
Yep.
It's like, I didn't even know they were all waiting for the school. I could have been waiting in the back of that line thinking there was some kind of accident. I mean, but that's been going on for a couple of decades now, ever since the school first started.
5 schools in this community, I believe.
At least 3 that I remember, but I don't get out of the house much. So.
You just get to the
So
beach.
is that just the way it's going to be on, or is
We're doing our best to work. As you saw, the sheriff was out there.
Yeah.
We can't do anything about that. They're not our roads. They're
Right.
county roads. So we've been in communication with the principals and the schools themselves and the sheriff's office to do our best to try to inform people where they should go, or they should not go, or they should stop, or they should not stop. There's businesses that are impacted by it as well. I mean, Alta is right next to the
Yeah.
school. They have people using their parking lot, and
Right.
they shouldn't
Blocking
be in
them,
there, so,
yeah.
right.
it's so the other thing is, you guys are growing. Is the community really growing? Is the government need to be growing? Do we really need all this money? I mean,
So-
always got to worry about all the money.
Looking back at historical numbers, and coming from the beach, we are very small. Right? And every small government, you all wear multiple hats. And coming into a place like this, I knew I was going to wear multiple hats. Laura knew she was. Everybody did. Gateway as a whole is almost built out.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, if it's not,
I think there's 3 developments that haven't started yet. Arborwood is almost done, and we've got a couple other ones that
so
are
if
in the
it's
works.
not already planned, it's in design
Mhm.
or permitting. So we're almost built out. Staffing wise, I think coming on board and evaluating who's doing what, I think we're good right now, depending on what the board chooses to take on in the future. We do have a public work. When I started, there was like 6 vacant positions. And a lot of them were your public works director, your business manager. We had a vacancy.
Mhm.
And then a couple boots on the ground staff as well. So we've made great strides in the last 90 days to get those positions filled. We have a public works director starting next month. He comes with 30 plus years of experience with construction. So I think once all of the holes are filled, we can better gauge the needs.
How many employees do we have?
We're at 27 right now, so we'll
Okay.
have 28 next month after the public works director
What is the
starts.
need? The total number about? Is that
I
where we
think-
need to
I
be?
think we may just
We're
a couple
close.
more recreation people, and we should be good. So I say we'll have less than 30.
But that could change if the board wishes to take, like a lot, if not all of the landscape maintenance is contracted out. If the board were to, let's take the soccer field, for instance, instead of having Mainscape mow it, if we took that in-house and mowed it ourselves, we'd have to evaluate the staffing
Oh, for
levels.
sure.
Have someone for that,
Gigantic.
yeah.
Mainscape's been doing the landscaping here for a long time.
Yes. Yeah.
So, anything else about Thursday people should know about, or October 6th that you want them to be aware of that I might have missed because I'm not very bright?
I think the October 6th is the biggest one where there's been the most questions. The meeting on Thursday is just our annual budget.
Mhm.
Like same, I don't want to say same old, but it's the same that we have every year in August. The biggest change this year is the bond hearing, the bond validation that'll be in October.
Reach out to customer care. There's
Yes.
like 6 of us.
We all monitor the
monitoring
box, and if anybody's got a question, it'll either get routed to Chelsea or me or whoever it should go to get an
that.
answer.
And if you have questions, reach out.
Yes.
The
The timing was confusing too, because I know the letters went out almost back to back. The one for the bond and went out, and then like 2 weeks later, the one for the budget went out, and so people are mixing the two together, and
Yeah.
so there's some confusion there as well.
call, email. Yesterday we met with a couple for over an hour. That's our jobs. It's
Yeah.
I've
to
spent
sit-
half hour on the phone with different residents when they call. I mean, I'm all about the numbers. That's my job. So
And
we're here.
That's the key with everybody communicating with
Yes,
them. And
we are
they
more. I
appreciate
would
it.
rather spend a half an hour on the phone with somebody and explain something, even if it's a 5-minute call, instead of having all this stuff flying around out there that's
Misinformation.
wrong, all the misinformation. Call, email, ask us your questions.
Two, looking at the master engineer's report, I had a phone call with a gentleman the other day, and he's like, well, what about this project? Or what about this? Give us that input.
Yeah.
Let's look at everything. Let's look at, what's needed out there. That's
Right.
the people who live here are the ones who can give us the best input and
Sure.
feedback.
Yeah, you
what's
guys
needed.
are out in the neighborhood or in the community every day. And the master engineer's report is vague on purpose, which gives us the flexibility to be able to, if things come up in the future, as we learn from the community that this may need to be done or this may need to be done, we've got a pool of money for that area that we can add that project in then and take it on.
Well, great. Well,
Follow us on Facebook.
okay.
We've been pushing out a lot of great information, FAQs.
I believe it's
Gateway
Gateway
Services.
Services CDD is our name
Okay,
on.
I'll make sure we post it out there too. What's the customer care email again?
Customer care at gatewaydistrict.org.
Well, thank you guys for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All righty. All right, folks, if you have any questions, you know where to send them. Thanks a lot for joining us.